Shalom everyone, my name is Jacqueline Luz, and today we will continue with another video on this channel for the series Study of the Torah. And it's titled Fighting Against Adversities with the Eternal. And we will reflect on the book of Genesis or Bereshit from chapters 32 to 33. Previously, we saw that finally it was time for Yaakov to head out of Padan Aram, where he was staying with Laban, the father of his two wives, and also the uncle of his mother, Rebekah. After 20 years of unfairness and mistreatment from his uncle, he finally decides that it was time to leave along with his wives, their servants, and his children. And this is something that Elohim himself also revealed to him. And he left with everything that belonged to him that was provided by Elohim as well. After leaving, Laban heads on after Yaakov and his daughters, but is warned by Elohim that he must not do any harm to Yaakov. In the end, both men come to an agreement. They made an oath, and at the end of chapter 31, in verse 54, it says, "Then Yaakov offered a sacrifice on the mountain, and he invited his relatives to eat bread. So they ate bread and spent the night on the mountain." Now, in both chapters 32 to 33, we will see how during Yaakov's path heading back to Beersheba, where his father was staying, he meets with his brother Esav, and Yaakov prepares himself for their encounter. Beginning with chapter 32 from verses 1 to 3, it says, "Early in the morning, Laban got up, kissed his grandchildren and daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban left and returned to his place. While Yaakov left on his way, the angels of Elohim met him, or the Malachim of Elohim met him. Then Yaakov said when he saw them, 'This is Elohim's camp,' and he named the place Machanaim." The word Machanaim that we find in verse 3 can be found in Strong's Concordance as Hebrews 4266, and this word Machanaim means double camp. Now, this is a very astonishing event that we can see at the beginning of chapter 32, given that only Yaakov is able to see this camp where the Eternal's Malachim were gathered. He is heading towards Beersheba with his family, his servants, and his cattle, when suddenly he sees these Malachim. And in verse 32, it says that in verse 2, it says that the Malachim of Elohim met him. Therefore, we know that only he was able to see them, these beings of light that seemed to be moving before them, yet were unseen by the rest. We can also see that this camp is made of the holy servants of the Eternal, a camp of only Kedoshim. Now, the text doesn't specify exactly why they were there, and these are also the only texts that talk about this event. But Yaakov had an understanding that there were two camps present at the moment, a camp of men and a camp of Malachim. That is why he called the area Machanaim. Today, we may not be able to experience such an event as Yaakov did. We don't really see the Malachim around us, but what we do know is that the Malachim are also present in our lives. We may not see this camp of Elohim, but it descends and defends those that fear the Eternal. They are around us, near our homes, and are helping us in all moments. Having this fight that is invisible to mankind, but is very much present between the Malachim and those who are a product of the adversary, all those evil spirits and demons that lead mankind astray. We know that the adversary is out like a lion, seeking for its next prey. But we shouldn't fear, knowing that the Eternal is protecting us through his Malachim, and more importantly, through Yeshua. He guides us at all moments so that we don't fall in the traps of Satan. But, of course, we must all live a life of integrity and obedience to the Eternal at all moments. The Malachim are here to serve us, but only those who obey the Eternal's instruction. In Hebrews chapter 1, verses 13 to 14, it says, "But to which of the Malachim has he ever said, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'? And verse 14, are they not all ministering spirits sent out for service to those about to inherit salvation? The Malachim are the ones who are here to serve us, those who are to inherit the salvation that the Eternal has given through Yeshua. Therefore, every single day we must present ourselves in obedience and in integrity before the Eternal, if we want to receive this help that finally the Malachim are giving us. Continuing with verses 4 to 13, it says, Then Yaakov sent messengers before him to his brother Esau to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. He also commanded them, saying, This is what you should say to my lord, to Esau. This is what your servant Yaakov said. I've been staying with Laban and have lingered until now. Now I've come to possess oxen and donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I sent word to tell my lord in order to find favor in your eyes. The messengers returned to Yaakov, saying, We went to your brother, to Esau, and he's also coming out to meet you, and 400 men with him. So Yaakov became extremely afraid and distressed. He divided the people with him, along with the flocks and herds and camels, into 2 camps. For he thought, if Esau comes to one camp and strikes it, that camp that's left will escape. So we see that Yaakov had to cross through Edom in order to continue his path to Beersheba. And as we may remember, Edom is a name given to Esau, his brother. What we can also remember from these 2 brothers is that after Esau found out that his father Yitzhak had given his blessing to his son Yaakov, and not Esau, whom was supposedly the firstborn and was supposed to receive it, Esau was so furious and was filled with so much hate against his brother. In chapter 27, verse 41, it says, So Esau bore a grudge against Yaakov because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, Let the time for mourning my father draw near, so that I can kill my brother Yaakov. So Esau was extremely furious and angry against his brother Yaakov for taking the blessing that, in his opinion, was supposed to be his. But as we studied previously in this portion, we mentioned that this was all a part of the Eternal's plan. It was his will, and he also confirmed it to Yaakov later on. On verses 7 to 8, when we see that Yaakov finds out that his brother is also coming to meet him with 400 men, he becomes afraid and distressed, and decides to divide his people into 2, his flocks and herds and camels, since he thought that it says, as it says in verse 9, that if his brother came after one camp, then at least the other camp that was left would be preserved and would be able to escape. So Yaakov obviously thought that his brother was out to kill him after all, or maybe at least do some harm to him, his family, and his possessions. But despite having this fear and distress, Yaakov still continues to trust the Eternal Father. In verses 10 to 13, it says, Then Yaakov said, O Elohim of my father Abraham, and Elohim of my father Yitzhak, Adonai, who said to me, Return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you. I am unworthy of all the proofs of mercy and of all the dependability that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed over this Jordan, and now I've become 2 camps. Deliver me, please, from my brother's hand, from Esau's hand, for I'm afraid of him, that he'll come and strike me, the mothers with the children. You yourself said, I will most certainly do good with you, and will make your seed like the sand of the sea, that cannot be counted because of its abundance. In a moment of adversity, Yaakov did not run away, nor did he let his fear overcome him and make him blame the Eternal for all that he had been through. He could have possibly blamed the Eternal for making him take the blessing and earn the hate of his brother towards him. But instead, what we see from Yaakov is him humbling himself before the Father and state that he isn't worthy of everything, of every proof of favor that the Eternal had showed him, and he called himself servant of the Eternal as well. Even in his fear, he recognized the authority of Elohim over him and asked for him to deliver him from the hand of Esau. This is a great example for us as believers. Being believers doesn't mean that we won't ever go through trials, afflictions, that we won't ever experience moments of grief filled with anguish, distress, sadness, and worry. Yeshua himself said in John 17:15, I am not asking that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. He didn't ask for us to be removed from this world and its afflictions, nor did he ask for us to live a life filled with happiness, but instead he asked for us to be delivered from the hands of the evil one. And that is what we see Yaakov asking as well. He isn't asking to be removed from the face of the earth at that very moment, nor is he asking to disappear, but instead he asks to be delivered alongside his family from the hate of his brother. Many people who may come to consider themselves as believers may fall into this belief that they are never supposed to experience any suffering, or they may even believe that by being in a specific religion, they are protected and should only live a prosperous life. But even Yaakov, a patriarch chosen by the Father to receive the blessing that was given to Abraham and Yitzhak, experienced afflictions, and this was one of them. We must not come to think that our pilgrimage will be a life filled with pretty roses and rainbows. Certainly we have moments filled with joy as we celebrate the holy appointments, or even when we study the Torah, the book of Psalms, the prophets, and the Brit Hadashah, or even when we share with brothers and sisters of the same faith. But we must also understand that in our pilgrimage, we will find thorns, rocks that will want to make us stumble, and we can even come across a lion that's out there waiting to devour us. In those moments, we must do as Yaakov and seek the Father. Pray just as Yeshua taught us, to be delivered from all evil, and for him to give us the strength and wisdom we need to overcome our adversities with him. We can also find this example with our Mashiach, when he went to pray at the Mount of Olives before he was handed over to the authorities. In Lucas chapter 22, verses 41 to 44, it says, And he pulled back about a stone's throw from them, got on his knees, and began to pray, saying, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Now, a malach from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and in his anguish he was praying fervently, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling down on the ground. Yeshua is the perfect example for all of us. In my humble opinion, I believe that everything we may experience, any affliction and suffering we may have in our life, will not compare to what Yeshua experienced as he carried the weight of all of our sins, knowing that he was to be given as a lamb to be sacrificed. The text says that in his anguish and prayers, his sweat were like drops of blood falling down on the ground. And yet, despite this, he continued seeking strength from the Eternal so that he could fulfill his Father's will. Now, we should also understand that even though the Father can be considerate towards those that seek him and even give them the strength that they need the moments they need it, he expects obedience in return. And not just during those moments that we may need him, but every single day. Every single moment of our life, we must present ourselves before him in integrity, loyalty, and obedience to him, without practicing transgressions. In Psalm chapter 26, verses 1 to 3, it says, Vindicate me, Adonai, for I have walked in my integrity and trusted in Adonai without wavering. Probe me, Adonai, and test me. Refine my mind and my heart, for your love is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth. It takes a lot out of someone, out of a believer, to be able to come up to the Father and say, "Test me, examine me, analyze my heart and my mind, for I have walked in your truth with integrity." Yet this is something that we must all do. It may seem impossible, but it's something that we can actually reach with the help of the Eternal. And this is actually how we fight our adversities with the Father. As long as we walk in His path of truth and life, which is Yeshua, keeping ourselves in integrity without wavering, with His Torah in our mind and heart, then the Eternal will be there guiding us through His Son and His Ruach, protecting us as well with His Malachim, so we may not waver in our path as we head to the promise of eternal life. Without showing obedience to the Father, without fearing and trusting Him, we will easily succumb to our own distress and afflictions. Continuing with verses 14 to 24 of chapter 32, it says, "So he stayed overnight there. Then, from all that had come into his possession, he took an offering for Esau his brother, 200 female goats, 20 billy goats, 200 ewees, 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the hands of his servants, each herd by itself, and he said to his servants, 'Pass over before me, and put a gap between each of the herds.' Then he commanded the first one, saying, 'When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, To whom do you belong, and where are you going? And to whom do all these things before you belong? Then you are to say, To your servant, to Yaakov, it's an offering sent to my Lord, to Esau, and look, he's also behind us.' And he also commanded the second one, the third one, and all those who were going behind the flock, saying, Say the exact same thing to Esau when you find him. Then you are to say, Look, your servant Yaakov is also behind us. For he thought, Let me appease him with an offering that goes ahead of me, and afterward see his face. Perhaps he'll lift up my face.' So the offering passed over ahead of him, while he spent that night in the camp. Then he got up that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of the Habok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent them across whatever he had. As a way to prepare himself and to appease his brother, Yaakov figures that the best way to do so is by sending him gifts from his possessions. The Eternal may have revealed this to him that night, or he may have figured that his brother could be so easily appeased through material things. Only this way did Yaakov think that he could change that anger and hate that Esau had been feeling into gratitude and happiness to seeing his brother. In the next portion, from verses 25 to 32, we see a very interesting and mysterious event take place. So Yaakov remained all by himself, in verse 25. So Yaakov remained all by himself. Then a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So he dislocated the socket of Yaakov's hip when he wrestled with him. Then he said, Let me go, for the dawn has broken. But he said, I won't let you go unless you bless me. Then he said to him, What is your name? Yaakov, he said. Then he said, Your name will no longer be Yaakov, but rather Israel, for you have struggled with Elohim and with men, and you have overcome. Then Yaakov asked and said, Please tell me your name. But he said, What's this? You are asking my name? Then he blessed him there. So Yaakov named that place Peniel, for I have seen Elohim face to face, and my life has been spared. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed by Peniel, limping because of his hip. That is why the children of Israel do not eat the tendon of the hip socket to this very day, because he struck the socket of Yaakov's thigh on the tendon of the hip. This is a portion of the text that is very interesting, mainly because we see Yaakov having this intense fight with this mysterious man that we don't know. In verse 29, we come to the understanding that whomever Yaakov was fighting with, he had authority. So this mysterious man could have been a malach of Elohim. Some say that it was the Eternal himself, whereas others say that it was Mashiach who fought with Yaakov. We can't really be sure, and we don't know, because the text doesn't specify. It only says that Yaakov fought with this man and was able to overcome him. We may say that it was Yeshua because the name that Yaakov gives to this place is Peniel, which means I've seen Elohim face to face. And we can actually find this word or this name of Peniel in Strong's Concordance as Hebrews 6439, and it says its definition is face of Elohim. So we could say that it was actually Mashiach who was the one manifesting the Eternal there at that very moment, because as we may know, no one has been able to see Elohim, but he has been presented to us by Yeshua. This is what we come to understand through the scriptures. And the Mashiach manifests the presence of the Father on this earth so that we may know him. Yet, despite this detail, we can't completely say that it was Yeshua who fought with Yaakov, because the text doesn't specify that Yaakov fought with the messenger or angel or malach of Elohim, as it does in other parts of the scripture. In the end, it's important to note from this portion that Yaakov fought with a being superior to him, much stronger, and that mysterious man needed a supernatural power to suppress Yaakov. Despite there being a bit of mystery in this portion, what can we learn from it? And what can we learn from this fight that Yaakov had? For Yaakov, this fight from the night towards the daylight could represent for him the darkness he endured in his life, fighting even from the womb to receive the recognition and blessing, fighting against all adversities until he finally received the recognition of the Eternal and received as well the blessing. Not just the earthly promise of a great heritage for his descendants, but a spiritual blessing that has been passed down through his children and has even become a blessing for us, the people of the nations. Yaakov was a very persistent man, very stubborn in reaching his main goal and objective in this case, which was to receive a blessing from this mysterious man. Yaakov knew that this was a special manifestation, and he was not willing to let him go until he was blessed. In the end, for his stubborn and persistent fighting, the man asked him what his name was. To which Yaakov responded saying, my name is Yaakov, which, as we have studied before, comes from Hebrews 3290, which means heel catcher, making a reference to how he had got his brother's heel, or how he caught his brother's heel when Rachel was giving birth. No, Rebecca, yes. When Rebecca was giving birth. If we remember clearly that event when Esau was being born, and we see that Yaakov's hand reached out to Esau's heel. So that's how he was given the name of Yaakov. So we see that he answers that this is his name, Yaakov, and the man then changed Yaakov's name to Israel, which if we go to Strong's Concordance, we can see that this name, we can find it in Hebrews 3478, and it means he will rule as Elohim, or he will rule. And we can also see that it comes from the roots of Hebrew 8280, Sarah, which means to prevail, have power, and Hebrews 4010 or 410, I apologize, Hebrews 410, which is El, which means strength. So we see how finally Yaakov was not going to be recognized anymore as the one who held on to his brother's ankle or to his brother's heel when he was born, nor will he be remembered as the usurper as his brother had called him, but instead he will be called Israel, for he had prevailed all adversaries, or all adversities. He had overcome his adversities, all tests and afflictions from Elohim and man. This was a very special moment because this name not only lasted with Yaakov, but it was also the name given to the people of Israel, a people who fought against the Pharaoh and his oppression with the guidance of Elohim, and who also fought against the adversities of other nations. And despite coming to a point of rebellion against the Father, there was always a remnant that continued fighting and overcame all adversities with Elohim. As believers, we also learn a lot from this event. And just as Yaakov, we can also receive the name of Israel. In our life, we also go through this time of darkness, where we are constantly fighting with the temptation, the trials that come our way, with the world and its mindset. We find ourselves oppressed by the world and its system, constantly being cheated and mistreated by the world, receiving an unjust treatment. But once we begin to fight all these things with Mashiach now in our lives, we can overcome them with the eternal, and we continue persistent in our fight during our pilgrimage, for we know that we will continue to experiment trials and afflictions. And in this way, we receive the recognition or the name of Israel for ourselves as well. Yeshua in Matthew 11 verse 12 said, "From the days of John the Immerser until now, the kingdom of heaven is treated with violence, and the violent grasp hold of it." Only those that are persistent, that are valiant, and trust in the eternal are able to overcome all of these things, because we know that we need to strive in order to live in the kingdom of Elohim, which is doing his will in our life. And only those valiant enough will also reach eternal life. Even though it says in this verse that it's violence, that with violence you will receive the kingdom, we must understand that it doesn't mean that we will have a violent nature, but instead it's only those who are strong enough, who are valiant, who persevere, and who strive to serve the eternal will not only be living in the kingdom that Yeshua had brought, but we will also reach that promise of eternal life. And it's important to note that being Israel does not mean we are a part of a geographical nation, nor are we conforming to a religion or a certain group of people, but we are instead receiving this name as a title for our effort and persistence in serving Elohim. To conclude our study of today, let's read chapter 33 and see how the Eternal allowed Israel to even overcome his fear of his brother Esau, and also delivers him from Esau's hand. Then Yaakov glanced up and saw, behold, there was Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children first, then Leah and her children behind them, then Rachel and Yosef behind them. But he himself passed on ahead of them, and bowed to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. So in this first couple of verses, we see that Yaakov also takes this other way to approach Esau. Not only did he send gifts before him, and not only did he divide his camp into 2 in order to look after and preserve at least 1 camp, but we also see that he establishes this sort of order between the servants and his wives, Rachel and Leah. So we see that he puts the female servants and their children first, and we could see this in a way where he puts first those that may not be that much of importance to him, or that may not have that much value in his life, or that maybe he had this understanding that in the end they were servants, and the children that he had with them were also from these female servants, despite those children belonging to Leah and Rachel, as we have learned before. And we also see that after these 2 servants, he puts Leah, whom, as we've studied previously, even though he might have had maybe some affection towards Leah, maybe he had come to love her in a way, but it wasn't in the same significance or in the same depth as he had done with Rachel. And this is why we see Rachel and as well the son that she had, Yosef, put all the way at the end. Because Rachel, as we may know, was his beloved wife, and therefore Yosef was also his beloved son that he had with his beloved wife. So we see how Yaakov puts this order between the servants and Leah and Rachel. And we also see that he himself ends up going before all of them. So he goes in front of all of them in a way to protect them as well. And as he's approaching his brother Esau, we see that he bows to the ground 7 times until he goes near to his brother. So he stands up, he walks, he bows down. He stands up, he walks, he bows down again. And so we can see this as a way where he is humbling himself before his father, before his brother Esau. He is not approaching his brother with this air of arrogance. He is not approaching his brother with this air of, I have superiority, I have all of these blessings, I have the blessing, I have all of this before me. He doesn't approach his brother Esau in a way where he demonstrates himself as having superiority over him, but instead he humbles himself 7 times before his brother. He bows down to the ground before him to demonstrate that Esau has authority over him. And we even see previously that when he tells his servants as they approach Esau to mention to him that Esau is his Lord. Esau has that authority or that superiority over Yaakov. So this is a very important thing to note, because even though Yaakov was receiving all of these blessings from the Eternal, even though Yaakov had this understanding that he had been chosen by the Father to receive the blessing, he did not think that at any moment that he was above everybody. He didn't think at any moment that he should have the authority or that aura of a king. But instead, we see that he humbles himself. He humbles himself continuously to demonstrate that he is just like anybody else, that he is not above anybody or everybody. But instead, he has this authority still. And we also understand that that authority is also the Eternal. So Yaakov is listening to the Eternal's will, fulfills the Eternal's will, and continues to practice this nature of humbleness and gentleness in his life. So this is a very important thing to note for all of us as well. When we're fighting against our adversities, we can't think that we're able to do this all by ourselves. We can't think that we have this power, that we have this authority now in our lives, that we can do anything that we want without there being any consequences or without us ever suffering the outcome of those situations. But instead, we must humble ourselves in every single situation and understand that the Eternal has the authority over us, and understand that without the Eternal in life, we are really nobody. We need the Eternal in order to have our life. We need him in order to have a purpose on this earth. And obviously, we may have a name, we may have a status, we may have this understanding from other people of who we are on this earth, but it's the Eternal who defines who we truly are. It's the Eternal who defines who we are serving and what we should be doing in our life. So this is something that Yaakov has very much present in his life, and therefore this is why we see that he humbles himself even in the situation. So as he's fighting against his adversities, as he's fighting against this hate that his brother has against him, we see that he continues to obey the Eternal, and we see that he continues to serve the Eternal in such a humble way. Continuing on with verses 4 to 5, it says, "But Esau ran to him, hugged him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept." So we see in this case that the Eternal not only saw this or heard Yaakov's prayer, but he also saw this attitude that Yaakov was presenting. And through all of this, what the Eternal does is that he softens Esau's heart. Although we don't see the text clearly state this, but what we see is that after all of this time that Esau probably bore this grudge against his brother, After all of that hate that he had against his brother, after everything that he had gone through with him, we see that Esau, when he finally sees Yaakov, he doesn't lunge at him, nor does he attack him, nor does he try to strike at him or his wife and children, but instead we see that he runs up to him and he hugs him and falls on his neck and obviously kissed him on the cheek as a greetings, as a hello, and also as a way to demonstrate that he had missed him and that he had possibly forgiven him already. Maybe he had forgiven him before, but from what we see that he was going to meet Yaakov with 400 men, that forgiveness might have come to him at that very moment that he saw Yaakov. After seeing all of those gifts and after seeing that Yaakov appeared before him and reverenced or bowed down before him 7 times, we see that forgiveness or that nature of forgiving comes into him. And they wept, they cried together, recognizing that after everything that they had gone through, the Eternal had helped him, or had helped both of them prevail. They had helped both of them overcome. In verse 5, it says, his eyes glanced up and he saw the woman and the children, and said, who are these with you? And Yaakov said, the children whom Elohim had graciously given to your servant. Then the female servant approached, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah also approached along with her children, and they bowed down. And finally, Joseph and Rachel approached and bowed down. What do you mean by this whole caravan that I've met? So he said, to find favor in your eyes, my lord. But Esau said, I have plenty. O my brother, do keep all that belongs to you. Yet Yaakov said, no, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, then you will take my offering from my hand. For this is the reason I've seen your face. It is like seeing the face of Elohim, and you've accepted me. So here we see that Esau is questioning and asking to Yaakov, why is it that he's receiving all of these things, or why is it that he's seeing all of these caravans be presented before him? Why are they telling me that these are all gifts to me? See, so Esau has all of these questions, and even though he tries to give it back to Yaakov, Yaakov tells him that it is for him, because he has found favor in Esau's eyes. And we also see that Yaakov makes this comparison that he has seen the face of Elohim, or that it is like seeing the face of Elohim. And so we know that obviously Elohim doesn't have a face, he doesn't have any physical features, but we do know that the Eternal has presented his favor through Yeshua, which, as we may also know, is represented in the scriptures as the face of Elohim. So Yaakov saw this face of Elohim, this face of favor, this face of compassion, this face of forgiving everybody for their transgressions. So even though Yaakov didn't do a transgression against Esau, Esau felt it in his way that he had been unjustified, or he had gone through this whole thing of losing his birthright because Yaakov had stolen it from him. So this is what we see Esau's opinion being on Yaakov receiving the blessing from his father. But after everything Esau had forgiven him, and to Yaakov, this was a very beautiful moment, and this was the moment where he saw finally this favor in his brother's eyes. And for him, it was like seeing the face of Elohim. In verse 11, it says, please take my blessing that was brought to you, because Elohim has been gracious to me, and because I have everything. So he kept urging him until he accepted. Then he said, let's journey and be on our way, and I'll go ahead of you, he continued. My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that the flocks and the cattle in my care are nursing. So if they were pushed hard just one day, and all the flocks would die. Please let my Lord pass on ahead of your servant, and I'll move on forward gradually, at a pace suited to the livestock that are before me, and at a pace to the children, or suited to the children, until I come to my Lord and Seir. Then Esau said, please let me leave with you some of my people who are with me. But he said, what's this? Let me find favor in my Lord's eyes. So on that day Esau returned on his way to Seir, but Yaakov journeyed to Sukkot and built a house for himself, and for his livestock he made booths. That is the reason that place is called Sukkot. So Yaakov arrived in Shalom to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and camped right in front of the city. He purchased a portion of the field there where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. There he set up an altar, and he called it El is Israel's Elohim. So in the end, we see that these two brothers head on their way. Esau returns back to Seir, and Yaakov ends up making tents at Sukkot, but then he also ended up arriving in Shalom, or in peace, to the city of Shechem. Later on in the next chapters, we will see that this stay that Yaakov had in Shechem also had these consequences, or these adversities that he ended up going through. But it's not something that only affected him, but as well all of his family. So this is a very important thing to know, because when we're facing our adversities, we must not conform ourselves in a place. Once we've gone through our adversities, and once we have overcome them with the eternal, and we've reached a state where we're now in Shalom, we must not think that that is all. We must not conform ourselves to that situation and just stay there. But we must instead continue striving in our pilgrimage. We must continue walking in the path of truth. Because we see here that Yaakov, after going through everything with Laban, and after receiving the forgiveness from his brother Esau, we see that he arrives in Shalom. So he arrives with this feeling of fulfillment. He arrives to the city with this peace in him, knowing and understanding that the Eternal is with him. And yet later on, as we will see, he commits this mistake of staying there and not continuing forward as he was supposed to. But this is a study for next time, and this is all for today's video. Thank you all for watching all the way to the end, and we hope that this study has been of much blessing for you as it is for us. And may it remind us that we must continue striving with the Eternal as we fight our adversities, seeking strength from our Father, but at the same time with the understanding that we must always present ourselves in integrity and obedience. Only in this way will we be recognized as Israel. If you have any questions or comments, we ask for you to write them in the comment section down below. You can also give this video a like and share it, and if the Father permits, we will see you next week. Shalom!